All right.
Hello, Internet. I'm Dan.
And I'm Chaz, and this is Wine is Serious Business, episode 235.
Yes.
You got it right this time. And we're here with winemaker Matt Berson of Love and Squalor Wines to drink through some of his wines with us. So, poor grammar, but anyway.
That's cool. We ran into Matt quite a few years ago, really. Like, you were, I think, assistant winemaker at Brooks at the time.
Yep.
And had an early love for Riesling, so right away we're like, oh yeah, let's talk more. Found out he's making some of his own wine, liked his Riesling right away. We've had some of his wines on the show in the past. We're really happy that he was able to come out and join us.
I liked it.
This evening.
Thank you.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I'd only be here. I'm only here because you like my wines.
Good.
We were haters, you'd be like, F these guys.
Yeah, I don't think so.
It's easy to make friends with people you agree with. So.
Absolutely,
Yes.
absolutely. Yeah, so I make Riesling and Pinot pretty much. I mean, there's a few other esoteric things that float around, but that's my passion, and Riesling especially is my passion. I moved to Oregon in 2001 and took over the wine list for a restaurant, and there was Ransom. It was 2002, no, 2001. There was a Ransom Riesling already in the cellar. And I popped it one night, and I was like, holy smokes, like, they can make some Riesling in Oregon. So I started sort of following that path and found myself in a position to make wine instead of sell it.
And when you made your first commercial vintage, was there any Pinot involved in that at all, or was that just one?
There was.
Oh, okay.
I was actually, at that point, I was working for Tad at Ransom. I found myself, in the belly of the beast, and he said, hey, Marty, he calls me Marty, it's time for you to make some of your own wine. I'll sell you a little bit of Pinot and give you a barrel to put it in. And I was like, I don't know. And so I sort of went home and sort of hemmed and hawed about it. And I came back a couple days later and said, okay, Tad, actually, okay, Grandpa, I call him Grandpa. Okay, I'll do some Pinot, but only if you'll sell me some Riesling.
Nice.
Because I already knew.
Yeah, that was your love.
And he's a master of Riesling production, so I was like, I gotta learn that.
Man, I don't know much about Ransom Riesling at all.
He still makes a little bit. He's kind of stopped making white wines, but he still makes a little bit. Some of it goes into his vermouth, and some of it goes into a bottle that he does. So.
Gotcha.
All right, so the first wine we're trying, so we're going to go through 2 Pinots and 2 Rieslings today. And the first one is the 2012 Riesling from Willamette Valley. Just the Willamette Valley bottling, I should say. So we're talking a little bit about vintage. Does vintage matter to Riesling as much as Pinot, and how was the 2012 vintage for Riesling?
It absolutely does matter. Usually the Riesling is the last grape to ripen. Usually the press is clean, all the Pinot is already in barrel, and the Riesling comes rolling in around Halloween.
Which always cracks me up, because there's always like the wringing of hands about, will we get the Pinot in before it's too late? And no matter how late the Pinot comes in, like, have you got all the Riesling in too? Like, oh no, man, that's still hanging.
Well, Riesling it's a good Germanic grape. It stands up straight in the rain and just waits for its time. Like, it stands in line. It's very obedient. It waits for it to come, and doesn't complain very much. And actually, farming it is actually relatively easy because of that as well.
Do you get in on some of that then too?
I try to. I worked for one whole vintage in an old vineyard on Warden Hill Road.
Sure.
And then I worked a little bit in New Zealand and did some vineyard work there. But now my vineyard work is kind of curtailed just because of the cellar.
Can't do everything.
But 12 was. I mean, you sort of alluded to it. 12 was a warm vintage. It was warm for Pinot, and of course it was warm for Riesling. So it just got a little riper. It didn't get more alcohol. We sort of picked it before it got too sweet, but it.
10-8. Yeah.
Right, but biologically it was more ripe, so there were different sort of flavors than we usually get. So oftentimes in the Oregon Willamette Valley Riesling, there's a lot of citrus. Some tropical flower stuff, and maybe some green herbs. This went a little bit more towards stone fruit.
I totally get that.
Not to lead you.
No, it's evident on the nose, I think.
It goes more towards peach, nectarine,
Yeah.
what have you. There's still maybe some citrus and maybe some apple, which I forgot to mention apple, of course, is a typical Riesling note.
Yeah, see the there's like sort of a white pear and a green pear that sticks out initially to me. Some stone fruitiness, absolutely. But smells just fruity and very delicious.
Yeah, a little bit of like zippy limes on the nose.
I would agree
too.
with
Kind of
that.
underneath.
Bring
It's
the
definitely like
acid
that
in,
richer
yeah.
fruit. It's kind of in the foreground, but it's there.
It's also, we should mention, it's dry.
Oh yeah, we got
or relatively dry.
we got the nice scale on the back of this.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it is in the dry category.
And at 10.8 too, which is kind of nice, right? It wasn't.
Right. And I felt like I was able to go even a little drier maybe than I would usually go. I usually go for sort of a cabinet style
Right.
Riesling. I just felt I was able to go a little bit drier because of the sort of the lushness of the fruit up front. Kind of gave it this sort of, when you taste ripe fruit, your brain thinks sweet even if there's
Yep.
not sugar there. So that's
You don't
sort
need
of-
it.
I'm sort of playing with
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And I think really, like, if there was a little too much more, like, this isn't as acidic as some of your other wines, right? Like, it wouldn't take a whole lot more richness for this to be a little far in that direction, more of like a desserty style, right? Not something you can drink easily, which I think
Right.
is what you want here, right? Willamette
yeah.
Valley Riesling to be, right?
Oh yeah, I just wanted you to just drink a glass, drink the first glass, not even thinking about it, and then get on to the next one.
Mhm. It is super super easy to drink. Like, the fruit is really accessible. To me, it's like ripe sort of Honeycrisp apples leading into like slightly underripe peaches.
Sure.
There's that sort of acid leading into the finish, and then like maybe like some lime zest or lime. But a really nice play like all the way across the board, and good transitions. So it tastes delicious. It's wonderful.
Yeah, I feel like the peach flavors really bloom across the back of the palate, and the acidity kind of slowly sets in. It drifts a little more towards the lemon direction late, as it cleans things up. But that richness of the fruit without it being heavy late really does make it like easy to keep drinking, and makes each sip kind of exciting as like that peach fruit kind of pops up. Really, I feel like it's in a great spot right now too. So.
Well, so this has been in bottle for about a year, which is usually about when I start selling out
Sure.
of the Riesling, and it's usually when it's tasting the best, unfortunately. I mean, fortunately and unfortunately. I find that a year in bottle, because it's sort of it puts on enough weight to sort of carry the acid.
So seize the moment. If you see this, don't wait around.
It's still readily available. I made a little bit more in 2012 because I thought it was a great vintage.
Nice. Yeah, I want to say there was a wine that we did, a Riesling that we did on the show, where man, the acid was so powerful, like it was just overwhelming almost. But it must have been bottled like maybe a little early. I think it was a 2011 Willamette Valley Riesling. Do you
Could be.
remember?
Do you remember? Was it mine?
Yeah, it was yours. I'm pretty sure we did it on the show. Anyway.
It might have been. It might have been the 11 of that.
Yeah.
Because
Was that an
this is
acid
the-
bomb when it first came out? Like,
It was pretty
very
tight.
acidic?
Yeah. Well, 11 was a very, very cool. It was cool spring, a cool summer, a cool fall,
Yeah.
and it was still cool at Halloween when I picked
Yeah.
this stuff. So maybe.
So leading into that,
yeah.
sorry. Leading into that, so we've got the 2011 Antsy Pants Riesling.
That was almost the Chaz gulp. Almost.
You'll get there someday. So,
I love it when you're like, it's time to go.
well, that's one thing we did on the show is like, should we have a spit bucket? No spit bucket.
No,
Actually,
that's
this is a healthy rinse here.
Hey, yeah. Well, we're hanging out tonight, so the weather's
true.
beautiful, you know.
Yeah.
I'm in a good mood, so. So, what sets the Antsy Pants apart from the Willamette Valley bottling?
So Antsy Pants is the kind of sassy name that I've chosen to name my line of barrel select varietals. At this point I do a Antsy Pants Riesling and a Pinot, which we'll get to. Because I do the vinification of the Riesling in small vessels, like 50-gallon drums or 100-gallon tanks,
Nice.
it is a true barrel selection. So let's say I get 1 ton of grapes in from Brooks
Sure.
Vineyard, for let's say, that will get pressed and go into 3 different drums.
Right.
So they're truly, I'm creating 3 different wines
Yeah.
from that 1 ton, and I can play with it, do different yeasts, go to different dryness,
Yeah.
all that, and then so I can do a proper barrel selection, similar as you
You can create your
with
blends
wine.
easier. I mean, like,
Yeah.
it really gives you more control over it. It's
It gives you
awesome.
more control. It's a little bit more finicky because instead of having like 6 tanks of Riesling, you have 30 barrels of 30 drums of
Right.
Riesling.
Sure. Any
Yeah.
of which can go wrong if you're not.
Exactly. So it takes a little bit more. It takes a little bit more management, but ultimately, it makes for better wine.
And a lot of respect for the people who do that, right? Like,
Yeah.
like we just kind of joked about it, but that means he's putting in a lot of extra hours to make something that's more than like simple and easy drinkable, safe Riesling, right? Because that you could all dump in one big steel tower,
Right, dump the yeast
dump
in
the
it.
yeast in the top,
Yeah.
you know.
Set it and
Right.
forget it.
Yeah, and it takes a lot more work to make stuff this way, but you're able to bring out a lot more character. You're able to show off. He was talking about the age of some of the vines you work with, right? Like some fruit
Yeah.
that would easily be lost in a big blend, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's 6 different vineyards in that first bottle we just tasted, and 4 of those 6 were planted before the bicentennial, which for you youngins out there was 1976. So they're older, and I'm kind of an ageist when it comes to Riesling. With Pinot, I think a mix of vine age is good, because there's a certain vibration to young fruit that comes forward, which we'll taste as we get there. But with Riesling, to really dig deep, get those roots down into the bedrock,
Matters.
It really does matter. It
Okay.
shows through. Anyway.
Yeah, awesome.
So this was, so the Antsy Pants Riesling, 2011, like I said, it was a cool year. It made 55 cases of it. Actually, I think it says 54 cases. I was being a little silly. But it's 2/3 from Brooks Vineyard, which was planted in 75 and 6 to Riesling, and 1/3 from Cherry Grove, which is out by Gaston, which has a little block that was planted, I think it was either the late 80s or early 90s. Vinified dry and using only native yeast, or ambient yeast, or wild yeast, or whatever you like to call it.
Nose is definitely different here. Like you definitely see the difference in vintage. I'm getting more minerality. It's kind of like stones, and then like really fresh shiitake mushrooms too, where there's like this little earthy kind of organic character to it. It's not like the forest floor we talk about with Pinot Noir, but just a little earthy note to go with the stones.
So I find that I think part of that's age and part of it's the native yeast, and I sort of see these as the sides of the coin, or the yin and the yang almost. That the Willamette Valley is sort of the fruity side of Riesling, fruity in the best possible sense of the word, and the Antsy Pants is more of the sort of the dark earthy, the earthier side, or the savory side of it.
Yeah, a little lime zest in there too. Definitely, yeah.
Like I'm still getting really nice fruit out of it, but it's like definitely a bunch of notches down in intensity level, right? Like the fruit was very just right up front on the Willamette Valley, the 2012 Willamette Valley. Like this is, it's just, I guess I gotta keep smelling it. It's I'm between like apple juice and like cantaloupes, but it smells wonderful. I don't know.
A little of that, yeah.
It's got like a really more focused aroma as opposed to being something that's just like a bouquet. Right?
Yeah, a little bit of depth to get you thinking too.
Right, and so the idea behind this is I was in Germany working the harvest for Dr. Lawson in 2006, and we went traveling around, we went tasting, which you guys will get to do soon. Yeah.
Awesome.
And we were tasting with Egon Mueller, and you got to go taste with him. And he said, "Oh, 2006. This is a lot like 76." So he pulled out, or maybe it was 75, 76. So he's pulled out. We go into his cellar, and there's this dusty bottles, and he pulls out 76.
Bicentennial.
Yeah, exactly, right? I did think about that. I'm like, did you know that was? I didn't. I was like, I was with Egon Mueller. I wasn't going to throw anything like that out there. And so he popped the cork on this 76, and like it had fruit. You know, I mean, this is an old wine, an old Riesling, and it had really, and it wasn't primary fruit. It was sort of secondary, but it was definitely fruit forward and exciting, and still had a lot of life in it. And so when I came back home, I was thinking about that and wondering if I could ever do anything like that with Riesling. And so when I had the opportunity, when my business grew enough that I had enough Riesling in the cellar that I didn't all have to go into my single bottling, I thought about that. And there's different ways to age Riesling, or to make an ageable Riesling. The most famous one is with sugar. So these famous dessert Rieslings, dessert wines that age forever on the sugar, over a long time. But another way I thought, and there's no tannins, so you can't age it on that, like you would with a red wine. So I thought that acid the acid sort of gives it structure and holds the wine together through its life, and then as it ages, the acid sort of rubs down like a river rock or something like that.
Nice.
And the fruit sort of blossoms up from that. So that's the theory.
What was the first year you really went for that?
This is the jam.
So
This is good.
I think 2009 was the first Antsy Pants. It was called Fancy Pants, but now it's changed. There's pants on the label. Those are the Antsy Pants. So 09 was the first, I believe. Yeah.
Yeah, this rocks on the palate.
Just absolutely delicious.
Yeah.
Ernie Lawson says you can drink yourself sober with Riesling. So keep
I
doing
believe
that.
it, yeah, if you're drinking Walla Walla Syrah for 6 hours or something like that,
There you go.
switch to Riesling.
Suddenly you're all sober again.
Was it Steve used to say that about Guinness, right?
Was it? It was the
Well, he also used to say that Pinot Noir was the Miller Lite of wine.
Yeah, that's true.
Who's this guy?
Well, it goes with anything, right? It goes with food. It goes like, oh, you're gonna sit around and watch a game, like, drinking Miller Lite.
It's true.
Chad
So-
drinks more Miller Lite than I do.
Not anymore. I've stepped up. Rolling Rock.
What is your what's your cheap beer of choice?
My cheap beer of choice, well, I do drink some Session,
Yeah, that's
you know,
Yeah,
and the
it's good ones,
all of
Stubbies.
them,
But I'm
That's winemaking beer, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, well, I go to Mexico. I go for the Modelo Especial.
All right.
Kind of a funky Pilsner. I'm a Pilsner guy.
Me too.
So I find that refreshing. And
Hams is my bottom shelf.
Hams
fan.
is your butt. Yeah, I need a better bottom. I need a cooler bottom shelf.
I don't know,
beer.
especially in
Rolling Rock's
Mexico.
cheap now, man. I've been buying. Yeah, it's so cheap. So I've been buying it up, and you taste it side by side against like High Life, which was my previous.
Yeah.
We're getting off on a tangent, but yeah.
That's okay.
Yeah. So.
Well, I think what we're getting to is it takes a lot of beer to make wine.
There we go.
Is where we're going.
a lot of
and
people
it's
say
true.
that. Yeah.
And in my book, it doesn't take a lot of craft beer because that's too filling and it has too much alcohol. It takes a lot of cheap beer to make wine. Because you need
Nice.
something refreshing. You need
Yeah.
something to just cut it all.
Yeah.
Makes
Right.
sense.
Relieve some of the stress.
Exactly.
This is fantastic and complex, and it's got
Very
layers,
complex.
like you're getting that rich fruit, and instead of like a transition between the fruit and the acidity, it's running at the same time. This is something I love in wines of all stripes, where you're getting kind of like two experiences on your palate at once. I think that's rare and special, and it's really exciting to get to see that. And when we talk about, I mean, it really brings it out to you when we talk about guys who are taking Riesling really seriously here in the Willamette Valley. This is one of them, and this is a bottle that really puts that on display.
I would agree. I mean, it Dan really like completely nailed it there. I really, it's hard
I'm
to.
blushing.
Yeah,
That's all I can say. I'm glad you guys like it.
Super complex and hangs around for a long time. It allows you a lot of time to like sort of revel in the flavor and think about it, which is really fantastic. Sort of young peaches into like green apples, but then like this really hard lime that tapers through the finish for like a super long time. I mean,
But it's fresh. It's not like the limes has been sitting out in the condiment
No,
tray
no,
for
it's-
3 days. It's like
No, it's
it's
this
like
is killer.
zippy.
It's-
Yeah.
and all put together so well. So yeah, I mean, smoking Riesling.
Yeah.
This is
Sparkling. You can sip it. You can think about it. So what's retail on this?
It is retail at. That's a really good
Oh
question.
yeah.
It's
Even roughly.
$28.
Yeah.
okay.
$28.
Which I think is really like right on par with other high-end Rieslings in the area.
And totally acceptable for this wine. I mean, this is, yeah, drink it. It's complex and delicious.
It- yeah.
It's fantastic.
It's,
Yeah,
it's good.
one of the better Rieslings I've had in a while. Like, it's fantastic. So, awesome.
Yeah.
I really like it. It's really good. So,
Thank you.
Yeah.
all right. So your other love, you have Riesling.
Oh,
Rather love
run
Pinot
these
Noir.
off to the
Yeah,
side.
so stick them off the side.
black
so.
Pinot.
Yeah. So we got a couple of Pinot Noirs here. No 12s. Damn it. But
We're waiting for Wine Spectator to review them before we release them.
There we
yeah.
go.
Before I write my notes. me and wine. Yeah. But yeah, so what's the first one we're
This
going
is
to do?
we don't need to rinse, right? Because they're very
That's
Yeah, sure.
We just talk about how Chaz moves markets. Maybe if we say it enough, people will believe it, right?
Yeah. So this is the 2011 Willamette Valley, just the Willamette Valley designate. So.
Yeah.
We loved the 10. We did it on the show. I remember
Yep.
tasting it at the winery. I was really impressed by it. So,
How'd you feel about the 11 vintage?
11 was great. I mean, 11 was a very, very challenging vintage because it was cool throughout the entire spring, summer, and then into the fall. So ripeness was an issue. You know, people picked very later than I've ever seen in my short winemaking career. I think Temperance Hill even picked into November. Picked
I
Pinot into
remember.
November,
Yeah.
which is crazy because usually November it's just raining and everything's gone to gone to where it goes.
you got sauce, right?
But it's turned out to be a classic. I mean, that's classic Oregon.
Right,
You know?
at this point, yeah.
You know, you get
It's
2
all
weeks of
over.
summer and some nice and a lot of vegetables out of your garden. You know, a lot of lettuce. You know. This is a blend. I made 850 cases of it, which is my biggest production yet. It comes sourced from 6 different vineyards, some of them young, some of them old. Primarily Primard clone, but a mix of some other clones. There's some 777 and some other things in there. And I didn't change it up because it was a cool vintage. I mean, I just kept it how it was. I think that part of what makes this wine what it is that it has a mix of a vineyard age and a mix of AVAs throughout the valley, different regions throughout the valley. So it sort of hedges your bets on a cool year that you've got a bunch of different sites that some are going to get riper than others, and you can sort of make your blend. I love blending wine, so that's
Nice.
sort of.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those like the polarizing opinions in the winemaking world, right?
Yeah.
Like some people are the great stuff comes when you never blend, and other guys are like, I love blending. Like that's where the good stuff happens. And I've met winemakers with super passionate opinions on both sides of the table. So it's always
true.
fun to hear where people fall on that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm exploring the single vineyard thing. Like in 2012, I told you I have a couple single vineyard stuff coming out, but I really I like to cook. And so, like at home when I cook, it's like well, you put some salt in, but you don't just put some salt in. You put a little paprika in, you put a little this, you put a little that, and then you sort of compose your plate, you know. And then you put that squeeze of lemon juice on it, just to whatever. So for me, blending the wine is sort of like putting together a plate or a meal.
And for consumers, I really like to pay attention to that too, because it's a lot of people make wines of like different styles, but I like to buy the blends from the guys who like to blend, right?
Totally.
Where from the guys who don't like to blend, the blends are more likely to be like, oh, we got to do something.
This is what's left.
Right.
Yeah. It does happen. Yeah.
And they work into it, but
barrels that didn't make the cut.
But as a consumer, I like to pay attention to those remarks. So.
And the nose on this is just fantastic. I like it, right? 11 for me was a lot of austere, sort of super bright and almost like very mineral-driven noses, like very chalky, very like floral, and very just bright fruited. And this has got some of that bright fruit, but it's got like a savory component in the back end of it that just it smells and tastes wonderful. Like it's in the.
So we're here in Portland, right? There's a lot of like as hippie food product as you want to get, you can find it here, right?
Oh yeah, which is awesome.
Yeah, you can find all the way out. And what this is kind of making me think of is like if you could imagine, like the sodas that people make that are like, $6 a bottle, right? Like sugar free, but they picked all the herbs for it from their garden. This reminds me of like a supernatural version of a cherry Coke. Because I'm getting like that fruit, I'm getting some of that like clovey spice, a little bit of that cola flavor. But I don't want to say cherry Coke outright because then that implies like this heaviness and kind of this sweetness, and none of that's coming through on the nose.
Yep.
But there's a little bit of that spice, a little bit of that fruit, a little refreshing character that I think a little bubbly water will get you.
Agreed. I was going to go even towards like there's a hint of like sort of the potpourri or like a dried floral sort of thing going on the nose, and like a little bit in the palate.
I'm gonna get
So this
Chaz a potpourri bag for Christmas next year.
Well, you don't need that. You just need to go walk around Temperance Hill Vineyard because that's where
Awesome.
that flavor comes. That's where that aromatic comes from. Like every time I smell or taste Temperance Hill out of the cellar, I get dried violets, sort of like grandma's parlor kind of thing.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, Grandma always had the dish, and it's got the dried roses. I'm poor with my flowers, but like a whole just a bunch of different dried flowers all mashed up, and it always had a really sort of like a red tea. I get it in red tea too, right? Like that's sort of that similar component, but yeah, that component comes out to me in wine regularly, and this definitely has it.
Mm-hmm.
So, but man, just one thing I like about this a lot is that. One thing I've noticed through drinking with people I've been around is that sometimes high acid or overtly intense wines can off-put people. I tend to like that sort of stuff.
Sure. Some people are haters.
Right. This I think the intent, I think it's a very well balanced, but I think the intensity level is all dialed down just a little bit, right? And I like the way the fruit and the acid coincide very well. And being sort of low alcohol, it doesn't really overpower the palate at all. I've had this a couple times in the past and sort of found that about it, and so I've been able to pour it for other people that have that feeling and they really liked it.
right.
So
Yeah. So when I pour this around, a lot of people say like, "Oh, it's so smooth,"
Yeah.
which is not usually the reaction to my wines.
No.
Because I'm high on acid. Like
Yeah.
I like it. For me, a wine that's vibrant in your mouth is much more interesting than something that's rich and smooth. It goes better with food. It leads to another sip or another wine or it's sort of part of the story as opposed to okay, I'm just going to curl up in a chair with this wine and that's the end of the story. You
Right.
know. But this particular wine, I think it's the integration of the acid is
that's what I
really
was
kind
saying.
of...
This has got a lot of acid. I mean, I can feel it as in someone who knows a little bit about wine. I can feel the acid, but just the integration is in the way that the fruit plays with it is really well done. So for Willamette Valley botting, it's killer. So.
I really like some of the floral elements on the palate too. I think you're getting some of those roses and violets there too. They're real delicate. I'd say definitely don't eat this or don't drink this with tacos or something like that. Spicy food or strong food, I think you'd lose a lot of the really cool flavors, and the acidity would still play well with it. But I think some of this nice fruit that's really delicate in its expression, and I think contrasts well with we both like good acidity in our Pinots,
Right,
so
yeah.
it doesn't throw us off for a more tart wine. But I think there's some really good savory complexity, some good fruit components.
I agree.
That show up subtly, it's cool stuff.
And so how much is Willamette Valley bottlings all tend to run in the 20 to...
This is 24 on the shelf.
Okay.
Solid.
Yeah.
So usually it shows up on your restaurant list for mid-30s to 40.
And at that price point, totally killer.
Yeah, people ask us about that price point a lot, so if you're watching, you're interested, there's a recommendation for that.
Totally.
Still plenty of that on the market, I assume, right?
Absolutely.
Is that the current vintage, you said, right?
Yeah, it's the current
That's-
vintage. People can wait for the 12s.
Yeah. And they can buy it at plenty of local retail spots in Portland, but they can send you an email as well,
Yeah, you can send me
right?
an email to matt@loveandsqualorwine.com. I've actually got a sale currently going on. I forget, this comes in at 19 and change if you buy it online from me right now, and if you mention these guys, I'll throw in shipping.
There you go.
Awesome.
So as a sub $20
For all of us,
bottle,
but-
that's killing it. So
Totally
yeah.
agree.
Yeah, and sub $20 bottle and free shipping. Those of you who watch out of state, seize the opportunity.
All right, so the last one we have, stepping back to 2010, we don't do a lot of 2010s on the show now. So,
They're falling off the shelves.
Yeah.
They're falling off the shelves.
Well, 2010 was a hugely popular vintage because it was a very classic. It was like the 11 in that it was cool, but then at the end of it, we got this nice sort of early Indian summer. I guess it was just an Indian summer, really.
Sure. Yeah.
And we were actually, I made this wine at Brooks. I don't make the wine there. I don't make my wine there anymore. But we were on the sorting deck in shorts and t-shirts, which
Love
is
that.
unheard of.
Love that old spot too.
In
It's
Oregon,
really cool.
because we got that late heat. which
Yeah.
so
you didn't do harvest in 13 in shorts and t-shirts.
with fleece, layers of fleece.
Didn't talked about this before, or I guess I didn't bring this up before, but this is the 2010 Antsy Pants bottling. So, what sets this one apart from the Willamette Valley?
Right, so Antsy Pants is like with the Riesling, it's the barrel selection from the vintage, and this is literally my 3 favorite barrels from
I'm sorry.
from the year.
Yep,
Yep, carry on.
that's awesome.
Yeah. So I made 75 cases of it, and it's actually kind of an involved process into making the Antsy Pants, and I can discuss
Good.
it if you want.
Yeah, why not? Let's do it.
Okay.
Somebody watching this will be happy to hear it.
So basically, when I get to blending, I take home a sample of every single barrel in the cellar, every single Pinot Noir in the cellar, in a little just a sample tube or a sample bottle.
Yeah.
And I spread it out on my dining room table, and I just wake up one morning and tell everybody to go away from me, and I just start tasting after coffee, of course.
Yeah.
And I just taste and take notes and taste and take notes, and usually, and then I go back to the notes a day or 2 later. And so with each vineyard set, I have about 6 to 8 barrels usually, is the way I have it set up. And there's often at least one, and maybe 2 barrels in that collection that are anomalies or have something else. Like they're all kind of similar, and then a couple of them have something just like it's kind of elusive. I can't put my finger on it, or like there's like some mushrooms or some wild violets, like in the Temperance Hill that I mentioned, or something like that.
Yeah.
And so I pull those out, and then I have my wife number those, and I taste those blind.
Cool.
And try to make a blend from that grouping, and that becomes the Antsy Pants. So the reason I do it blind is I found myself being my head was getting in the way of it.
Oh yeah.
I was getting political about it, like which vineyard do I pay more for the fruit, or what do I think it should be, and
You can't get away with which one did I love for the past 3 years running.
right, so it should be the same
yeah,
again.
Yeah.
So I try to move that out of the equation. Yeah.
Blind tasting's amazing for that.
Yeah.
Yep.
So if you
It's great. So
haven't done
it's
it,
blind blending.
Yeah.
that's awesome.
Yeah.
But it's good. It's just a new way to look at things you're familiar with. Man, smelling this now. We were just talking about that. Like the tents have been around for a few years now.
Yeah.
And they're definitely showing differently than they did on release. I think on release, a lot of them were. Well, I guess we probably still CO2 and freshly bottled young wines, right? But
Yep.
but just
A
like
little more
fresh
vibrant,
fruit, young fruit. You got stuff popping out of the glass. And this definitely is showing more of like that full Pinot Noir character. There's this, like a sense of richness again to the nose.
Agreed.
Like just good dark red fruits. I think really full here.
We sort of get to like the old cherries. This isn't in that vein. It's more like a dried cranberry, dried cherry thing sort of on the nose. But like the black tea sticks out a little bit bit of red tea, a little bit of floral, but smells just, yeah. It's like a darker version of what we were just tasting, right? Or like the Willamette Valley. At least in aroma, like there's still that sense of savoriness, but it's just a little darker and a little deeper, so.
On the palate, I was really feeling that the tannins have really integrated really well with the rest of the wine at this point. There's still a little bit of that dusty character, still just this like tiny bit of bite, adding some structure to the fruit. And the cherries, I wouldn't quite say age, but they're kind of like getting in that direction. There's still a good core of acidity to everything too, and I feel like I can taste a little bit of the oak here, and I think it's done really well. Thank you.
Well, I should say that there's actually no new oak in the cellar at all.
And any once used or anything?
There are some once filled.
Okay.
Right. So this actually one of the 3 barrels was once filled.
Okay.
So of my wines, that's the most oak influence you're gonna get, and it's on purpose. You know, I'm trying to build some structure and this and that, but I don't want to taste oak in it.
And of course, you're free to disagree.
now.
Do you feel like you taste any of it in there, or
Well,
no?
you're not the first to say that it's there.
Sure.
So I mean, my palate is limited by what it's limited.
I don't know.
by.
No.
Well,
curious.
it is.
Yeah.
For me, I don't, because I
Sure.
know what's I know that it doesn't have any new oak, so I'm like, oak's not a possibility when I taste it.
There we go.
But a once filled barrel will have some influence on it, and especially in a smaller blend like this, it will come through. But I mean, if you like to suck on wood, this is not for you. You know.
Yeah.
Sorry, I can't do it. Yeah, you can just
Well, I don't know if I'm going to keep that. We'll see. We'll see.
Sorry.
And of course, as you're learning taste-wise, you're learning more about wine, right? Like when you only know 4 descriptors, at least two of those 4 come into almost every wine you taste. And as I'm learning to expand my palate, understanding wine, you know, I've still got a lot to learn. Some things that taste like oak to me taste like. What do you, Chaz? Do you think it tastes like, or do you use it like leather or cherry pits or?
I didn't taste oak.
Okay,
initially.
well there we go. So I'm in the minority here, but yeah.
But then again, I mean, you've been drinking with me a long time. I actually, high oak wines can sometimes escape me still. Like I don't immediately detect that, or I don't immediately look to like oak as like, oh, that's the oak flavor. Like
Sure.
It doesn't jump out to me, and it does. I don't find it here. I mean, sure, I can see now that I'm like, it's stuck in my brain. I can maybe see like, okay, there's a little bit of like tannins that could be perceived as like wood tannins, maybe a little bit, but not so much so. I mean, the tannins here are very well integrated, remind me of sort of like a seediness or like a pomegranate seediness or something, but yeah, not initially like an oak, you know, like I don't know.
I think there's some structure to it, is what we're
really good,
talking
yeah.
about. Is
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
and whether that's from oak or from the like skins or what.
Stems? Any whole cluster on any of this?
I do whole cluster. Basically, when the fruit comes in, I look at it. I don't have a plan for it until I see it, because you never know what you're gonna get. And if I think that there's a ripeness of the stems, I'll actually bite the stems and taste the stems.
Cool.
Yeah. Because, well, that's just for me. I mean, some people like a certain percentage of stems.
And when you do it, like, what's good? You're like, oh, that's right on. Or like, oh no.
Right. Well, I mean,
like greenness, is that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking. I mean, sometimes there's a bitterness, you know, or like a real like, you know. I mean, stems never taste delicious. I don't finish the bite when I bite it. I just take a bite of it, you know, because we're not actually eating it. But anyway, and then if I feel like it's ripe enough, and also I examine it, an unripe stem is very bright green. A riper stem starts to mottle a bit with brown, or maybe fade to a more like a plant kind of green, like
Sure.
like a little bit of a duller green. And then I might do some, and so I don't recall with the Antsy Pants in the Willamette Valley. There's maybe like 8 to 10% of whole cluster in it, because there was a couple barrels that had 50% whole cluster, you know,
Sure.
throughout it, that ended up in it. So it ends up being a component, but not a calling card, I guess is what I'd say.
Nice.
Yeah.
I guess in the end, there's a little more just dark character, both on the nose and the palate, in the 10 and the 11.
Absolutely.
And definitely just some more integration. At the time has really kind of brought this together. It's in a really nice place right now.
But a little more intensity and a little more structure too. I mean, you can't escape that. Like the fruit intensity and the sort of savory and earthy flavors are definitely a little more apparent.
Yeah.
Right up front. And then the structure is strong, but well integrated and well balanced. I mean, it's
Not a heavy wine, I wouldn't.
No, absolutely not. What's the alcohol level in this? Probably pretty low. 12.9. Yeah. So back to what we were talking about 2012 or 2010. Excuse me. 2010. These wines were able to develop a great amount of fruit intensity and structure without having to develop that alcohol. And there's something really special in these wines. Like it's just awesome. And so it's a great 2010. So
We're going to wrap up with a couple questions off the wall for you. If you could have 5 acres of vineyard in any AVA in Oregon, and any AVA in the Willamette Valley to make wine from, what AVA would you pick?
Raven Ridge.
All right.
Absolutely. I mean, I love the Willamette Hills.
You would
probably
too.
be a second.
no, I was saying. Sorry, I have a question too.
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I mean, I cut my teeth. My first winery job was with Patty Green and Patricia Green Cellars, and like their estate vineyard is Raven Ridge. It's right next to Beaufrere, right down the street from Brick House.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, right over the hill from Whistling Ridge. I mean, and like this, there's a certain. It's not just minerality. It's also spiciness that comes out of that, and just an elegance from Raven Ridge. Plus, it's like the hardest. It's the smallest AVA, so it's the hardest to get any fruit from. So I would choose there.
Excellent.
Nice.
What's yours?
So, how long? What was your first vintage you made wine?
6.
So 6. So you were making wine
Under the label.
under this label, yeah. So a very small amount of time. What as making wine for what 6, 7 years at this point? What could you go back and if you were to go back and tell yourself when you very first started making wine? Now, as sort of a semi-experienced winemaker, like what would you go? What would you go back and what advice would you give to yourself? Like just getting into making wine and
If I tell myself to take notes.
okay. Record more.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, really. I've had the opportunity to work for a lot of great winemakers and be in a lot of intense winemaking situations, and at the time you're just sort of sponging it all in.
Yeah,
you know?
absolutely.
And like,
it's a lot.
and like, I mean, I have notes around. I've got like pads that are falling apart and this and that. But like, to really like try to write it all down. Like, how was it different in New Zealand and Germany and in 2006 versus to 2009
Okay.
and,
Yeah.
and this and that. And
No, that data is important. Yeah.
to be actually go back and look at it, and I'm pretty bad at taking notes.
I think everybody in the
Yeah.
world can be better at that, though.
Yeah,
I mean, that's how
it's true.
in both of our
It's true.
jobs, like we've got like decades of experience in how to document stuff, and we're still trying to improve it every day.
Right.
So.
Absolutely.
Right. But
Yeah.
I mean, like, I have a lab book from 2011, and it still only has like 2 pages filled out in it. I mean, I've done plenty of
But
lab
you
work.
know that, so you clearly
I've done
looked at
plenty
it.
of
Yeah,
lab work
yeah,
in that time, and it's all turned out. Most of it's turned out well, but
Yeah.
I wish I had a record of it.
Nice.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, time for you to ask a question of them.
So this is a kind of a general question. It has nothing to do with wine, but it has to do with another one of my loves, which is music, and it has to do with one of my favorite all-time bands, The Clash. And maybe it's an easy question for Clash lovers, but if you're not into The Clash, this will make you go back and do a little research. What was the last concert, the last live performance that The Clash performed, and where was it, when was it, and what were the circumstances surrounding it? Because it's an interesting story.
Okay, so
Yeah.
why not? I'll one up on this. This is a trivia question. We don't get those that often. First person to answer right, either on Facebook or YouTube. I'll check the timestamps. We'll send you something.
Word.
We'll be in touch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Make you a shirt. We'll make you a Rob Parker shirt.
Whoa. Okay, Chaz just took it up another level. There we go.
Yeah,
First
nice.
person to answer this question correctly. Facebook or YouTube. Robert Park.
All right. We'll see you guys next time. Thanks for watching the show. Bye.
Cheers.
Thanks.